Hi everyone, I thought I would make a video to go alongside Caleb's dad's video, which was the dad's NICU journey. You may have seen from other videos on our channel that I have a 10-year-old daughter called Liliana. So it had been quite a long time from that pregnancy and birth to Caleb's birth last year in 2023. So I'll talk a bit about that because I think it's important in terms of understanding how risk is assessed in pregnancy, and that's coming from a personal perspective. Obviously I'm not a health professional that works in maternity services or in neonatal medicine, so I can only talk about my experience. So in terms of Caleb, myself and my partner were overjoyed to find out around a year ago now, so sort of April last year, we'd found out that I was pregnant, and I think I had tested around sort of the 5-week mark. So I'd gone away for a hen weekend prior to testing and had gone back to work the following week and had brushed off my feelings of tiredness, like overwhelming lethargy, feeling out of breath. That was one of my symptoms, which sort of made me think I really do need to do a pregnancy test. Yeah, just general lethargy. I think I didn't have any morning sickness, so I was lucky enough not to experience any of that. So I found out around the 5-week mark, having been extremely tired, and just put it down to suffering after a hen weekend away. So everything from that point had been fine, and then the following week I started to experience some bleeding. Although this doesn't have any direct correlation with the premature arrival of Caleb, I think it's something that's important to cover throughout. What I will start with as well is that having had a previous pregnancy, obviously it's extremely easy to fall into comparisons and basing some of your assumptions and understanding about pregnancy on what's happened before. As well as Liliana, I had experienced pregnancy loss before, so I had quite a heightened feeling of anxiety anyway with this pregnancy. So when I had tested at 5 weeks and then experienced bleeding at around 6 weeks, I think at that point I just associated that straight away with, okay, this is not progressing. This was all very early on in my pregnancy with Caleb. So in terms of my thinking at that point, I thought, okay, this is bleeding, it could go either way. Although there was some hope having had a successful pregnancy with some bleeding. I had some health issues, like gynecological issues, prior to falling pregnant. So I'd had experienced like significantly heavy bleeding prior to my pregnancy. So around about, I would say about 8 months prior to falling pregnant with Caleb, I'd had very severe blood loss during period. Had been diagnosed, although it is technically a working diagnosis, with adenomyosis. So this is particularly important in terms of early pregnancy because adenomyosis is like the lesser known type of condition that's quite similar to endometriosis, and what can happen is it can be more problematic and challenging to fall pregnant. So my options really were to manage it with hormones, which I wasn't keen on because I had tried synthetic progesterone, I had tried tranexamic acid, mefenamic acid, you name it. I tried everything to control the bleeding and the pain with that condition. If I was to fall pregnant, that straight away, based on the working diagnosis of adenomyosis and also the fact that I'd experienced previous miscarriage, that I would need to be prescribed progesterone straight away, and that would be up until 16 weeks of pregnancy. So I was waiting for my 7-week scan at this point, so I'd gone for my 6-week scan because of the bleeding. So the bleeding, in terms of how serious it was at that point, it was pretty bad. So I would say like a heavy period. It would have soaked a pad. We decided, because we were just going out of our minds in terms of whether this was going to be a miscarriage or not, we decided to book a private early scan. So we booked this in prior to the 7-week scan because I was going out of my mind and I just really wanted that reassurance. If you can afford to do that for peace of mind, absolutely do that. I went into the scan and burst into tears because immediately I saw the flicker, so the fetal pulse. So that was great outcome, great news. Although I felt reassured, that concern, that worry never goes away. Leading up to the 7-week NHS scan, I experienced a few more, I would say 2 or 3 more incidences of bleeding. Went along to my 7-week scan. That was reassuring. Again, was told the same information as the private scan, that there was a fetal pole visible. I think around 2 days prior to that 10-week scan, I had another episode of bleeding, which was quite significant. Again, significant enough for me to worry. So at 11 weeks is when I experienced my most significant bleed yet. It was quite a stressful time anyway. The early pregnancy experience had been very tumultuous. I work full-time in a very stressful job, so I think I was very much on the go, and although I'd been paranoid, I wasn't always looking after myself. And I remember going to the kitchen to start cleaning and just bending over and feeling a gush, and the gush was strong enough that the blood had gone straight through my clothes and onto the floor. So seeing that bright red blood just gushing out was just mass panic. This had been the most dramatic blood loss I'd ever experienced. So I recall thinking, there is definitely no way that this is going to result in any type of positive outcome. I was a bit dismayed having gone to the regular emergency department, but was happy enough that once I got there, because of the nature of the concern, they expedited me to the emergency gynecology department. And then I was able to be examined by a consultant gynecologist who had a look and said that my cervix was closed, that it could be a number of things, that they wouldn't scan me at that point because I was 2 weeks away from my 12-week scan. At that point, I remember being told about the possibility that it could be a subchorionic hematoma if it wasn't a sensitive cervix or a miscarriage. I think I took around about a week or 2 weeks off work to really try and take it easy, because obviously stress in early pregnancy doesn't really support healthy outcomes all the time. I started to feel frustrated. I think that they couldn't give me a reassurance scan, so again I'd booked one privately. I went along to the private scan and everything was perfect. At that point I was telling the lady that was doing my scan about my experiences so far, so the bleeding that I'd had, and as she was scanning me she could see a slight shadow around the pregnancy sac, and at that point she said that is likely to be a subchorionic hemorrhage. We then had the 12-week scan. Everything was perfect. My due date had been moved slightly forward from, I think originally it was around the 30th of December, and then they said, oh, it's now the 28th of December. I had one slight episode of bleeding around about 14 weeks. It wasn't anything significant at all. And then I stopped taking, or I started to wean off the progesterone supplements. around about the 16-week mark. So I remember going for my 16-week checkup with the midwife, and explaining it to her, you know, I'm on these progesterone supplements, do I just come off them, which is originally what I'd been told by my GP, or do I start to sort of slowly taper off the dose that I'm on so my body doesn't like suddenly go into shock that I don't have this high level of progesterone. So the midwife at the 16-week point, when I asked that question, wasn't entirely sure, so had spoken to a consultant who then advised that I start to taper. So I was starting the tapering process around the 16-week mark. Although it's not advisable, I did purchase an at-home Doppler, and that was for my own reasons. I will make it very clear that I was advised against that by all health professionals. Primarily for the reason that, and I totally agree with, some women rely on it for reassurance and then may mistake something else for the fetal heartbeat, and then may not act on reduced fetal movement and other issues that might occur. So this is a very non-eventful period really, between 16 weeks and 24 weeks of pregnancy. So I had a nice period of time in between then. And around the 16-week mark is when we went for another private scan. So that was a gender scan, you know, which obviously it's not only a gender scan, you're also getting that reassurance. You get to see the baby again, because it's quite a wait from the 12-week NHS scan to the 20-week NHS scan that you have, you know, those 2 scans. For me, it was, you know, tumultuous because of the bleeding that I'd experienced. So although it was non-eventful, it was still a bit of a wait. So we had our gender scan and that went brilliantly. I invited my parents, my daughter Liliana and my partner Ruben. We were all in the room, and straight away I saw it was a boy. So I will add as well that obviously I had been assessed from the very moment I saw the midwife, I think around about the 9-week mark. And obviously having had the 12-week scan already and numerous private scans and early pregnancy scans, I'd been reassured at that point that based on my health, based on my previous pregnancy, based on all the blood tests and everything, I had been deemed as low risk. So there were no issues of concern. I would have a glucose test later on around the sort of 32 week mark. Because of coming from an ethnic minority background, I was higher risk of gestational diabetes. I was also, interestingly enough, high risk of preeclampsia because of having had a child with someone else and then having a new pregnancy with a different father. That actually increases the risk of preeclampsia, which is very interesting and not something that I'd ever heard or read about, and it just intrigued me. So I wondered what the relationship was, and to be honest, because of the experience that I've been through, it's not really something I've had a chance to research or really had a moment to think that's something I really want to read up on. Then we hit around September, early September, back to school time, and luckily enough for me, my partner had booked us a lovely holiday, which he had initially booked when I wasn't pregnant, but we decided to continue. Luckily the dates allowed us to, as we thought, because we believed that Caleb would be coming at the end of December, so we thought, well, we can continue with this holiday at the start of September, because I will still be able to fly at that point. I'll be 24 weeks and I was classed as low risk, so we decided to go ahead, and that was our baby moon to Dubai. So I was really looking forward to having a break from work, really excited about going and getting some sun, because we'd had a bit of a rubbish summer, although I was aware that I couldn't spend too much time in the sun, being heavily pregnant at that point. I was nervous about a couple of things with this holiday. One, that it was a long haul flight. I was worried about how I would feel being cramped up on a plane for 7 hours. So that was one of the things I was concerned about. The other thing I was concerned about was the fact that I was going to Dubai, and what if something happens whilst I'm there and it's a medical emergency? What am I going to do in that situation? first few days, absolutely amazing, no issues. I was pretty uncomfortable on the flight, I have to say. However, I think I dealt with it like a trooper. Like, I managed to get through the crowds in the airport and things like that, and managed to deal with the extreme Dubai heat, because September it was still extremely hot. About midway through, we were away for about a week, about midway through, I think the morning of, I'd gone for my pregnancy massage. So luckily enough, my partner had booked me a lovely pregnancy massage, which was out of this world. I'd gone back to our room. We then decided to go and explore the hotel. So we're having a chill out day in the hotel. I had this overwhelming stomach pain, and it almost felt like having the start of like a tummy bug, like the start of D&V. So I was really quite concerned at that point. So yes, so at that point I started to experience stomach pains, and tried not to freak out too much. Went to the toilet and there it was, blood. And I thought it's been, so at that point I was 24 weeks, so it had been quite a significant period of time from my last bleeding episode to then. So I was absolutely freaking out. Number one, because it had been so long since I'd had a bleeding episode. Number two, I'm on holiday. I'm past the point now that you would have the common early pregnancy bleeding. So I'm heading more towards like the third trimester, so I was worried that any bleeding at that point could indicate early labour. So the thought did cross my mind at that point about early labour and about viability if that were the case. So I remember thinking, gosh, like I've literally just hit the 24-week mark, so at least I've hit viability. I hadn't had any significant abdominal pain or pain in that region with bleeding previously, so then I was thinking, is this something that I need to be worrying about? So luckily I brought my Doppler with me, which provided some reassurance because I could hear the heartbeat. However, the bleeding continued, the pain continued, and I was freaking out. I managed to get through that situation, I don't know how, just by sort of breathing through it, I guess. And my partner obviously had been with me on that journey leading up to that point and had reassured me in the sense that we've had all these scares and actually they've ended up being okay, so not to panic. So we got through it. The bleeding eventually subsided to the point where I felt a bit more comfortable and I could hear on the Doppler. So the bleeding was bad to begin with, and I'd say, when I say bad, I mean it was bright red blood and there was a lot. But then pretty much straight away it died down. It was still bright red, but I'd had bright red bleeding throughout. So after the baby moon, we flew back, and on the day that we flew back, we got home, rested, and then I bent down to unpack, so to undo my suitcase, and I felt a gush of blood and absolutely freaked out. So I called the labour advice line, and the nurse assessor asked me to take a photo of the underwear I was wearing so she could examine the blood, and then she asked me to go and be assessed at the hospital. I'd gone in to be examined by the midwife. She listened to Caleb's heartbeat and said he sounds great, the heartbeat sounds great, my blood pressure was fine. So she wasn't too worried, but the doctor would examine me. So I was then seen by a consultant who examined my cervix, could see that there was some blood, but wasn't concerned that the cervix was thinning out or that it was open. So I felt again quite reassured. I'd gone back to work the following day, everything was fine. I went for my community midwife checkup. Everything's, you know, sort of ticking along okay. I felt reassured from my hospital visit. And then I started to plan for my daughter's 10th birthday. So we had decided to book an overnight stay in Windsor and to go to Legoland. For anyone that's ever been to Legoland in Windsor, it's very hilly, and also there's quite a significant amount of walking involved. I remember several points needing to find somewhere to sit down, and I remember saying to my mum, I just feel really uncomfortable, really tight, I just need to sit down. Maybe it's the walking, you know, I just feel like I've probably put my body through too much. So we tried our best to get back to the train, the hill train at Legoland, so that I didn't have to, although I walked it down the hill, I didn't have to walk up the hill to get out of the park, because I thought, okay, I've already put my body through a lot, like I don't want to then push it to the extreme by going uphill. So we got the hill train, luckily, drove to our hotel, and Liliana really wanted to go for a swim. Again, an important point, but you know, although it seems a little bit insignificant, I'm not trying to really prolong the story. All of these things are factors that I considered later on when I reflected on my experience. So we got back to the hotel, everybody was tired and wanted to go for a nap. I really couldn't nap, but I remember feeling tired, uncomfortable. But I went down to the swimming pool in the hotel. We swam for about an hour, I think, maybe an hour and a half. And most of the time whilst I was in the pool, I was just sort of floating around. But I did do quite a few laps in the pool. And then we had dinner, so we went and had a nice curry as a family and then headed off to bed. And I remember laying there and everyone was asleep and feeling very tired, but feeling extremely uncomfortable. But it's an odd sensation. I didn't feel like I was in labour. I didn't feel really off to the point that I would really majorly worry about it, but there was just something that didn't feel right. I couldn't relax, and then we decided to head home, but on the way home we wanted to pop into DFS to have a look at some sofas. I remember thinking whilst we were in DFS, thank God we are in a place that has a lot of places to sit down, because I just felt really off at that point. I felt really uncomfortable. I just felt like I needed to sit down constantly. So I really feel like Caleb isn't moving as much today. However, I had an anterior placenta, so the movements were always a little bit muted compared to what I had experienced with my daughter. Again, comparing my experiences. So sometimes I would feel Caleb, sometimes I wouldn't. I tried at that point to have a nap. I just felt overwhelmingly tired, and I just could not nap. At that moment, we then decided to head back home. We needed to unpack and wash clothes from our trip before work on the Monday. So I drove home. I'd done quite a significant amount of housework, and then I remember sitting down on the sofa and saying to my partner, I just don't feel right. I feel like I'm in pain, like I'm experiencing some cramps. And I remember saying, maybe it's Braxton Hicks, because I had experienced Braxton Hicks with my daughter, and I thought I'm heading towards the 3rd trimester, and that is when I started to experience Braxton Hicks with Liliana's pregnancy. So I thought it must be Braxton Hicks, and I remember trying to watch TV and I just couldn't concentrate, and the pain was sort of getting to the point where I would literally have to like turn my head into the sofa and sort of bury my head into the sofa. So it was pretty significant pain, but for some reason it just did not click that it could be anything else but just a bit of cramping and a bit of Braxton Hicks. I went to go and lay down, and I think my partner had said to me at that point, that's a good idea. Go and sleep. You'll probably sleep it off and you'll wake up feeling better. So I got into bed and I remember noticing that the cramps started to come like one after another. So I'd experience it and then it would happen again a few minutes later. And I thought, okay, I don't remember Braxton Hicks having any particular sort of pattern to it. So I did some research and I Googled like Braxton Hicks versus labour, and I remember still being a bit in denial and reading that Braxton Hicks should not have any pattern, it's sporadic. I've not been deemed high risk. At that point I had no bleeding, I had this mild cramping that was just sort of slowly getting a bit more pinchier in terms of the feeling, but it wasn't anything that significant. It's all a bit of a blur at that point, but I remember my partner coming into the room, laying down to go to sleep himself, and I would assume this was around about 11 p.m, and saying to him, I don't think I can wait till the morning. It clicked in my head without me saying it that these are contractions, this is early labour. And I remember my whole body going into shock and feeling like I know what's going to happen here, and feeling very shaky, very anxious, my heart was racing. So at this point I called the labour line, and the midwife that picked up the phone said to me, Mariana, I can hear that you are in labour. I can hear that the contractions are very close together because you are taking breaths, and I've been timing them while you've been on the phone, so you need to grab a bag and get yourself to the hospital as soon as possible. And I remember thinking all sorts of things like, what bag do I bring? Because I'm at 26 weeks. I'd literally just turned 26 weeks. I had not packed a bag in preparation for going to hospital. I had bags full of dirty washing because I'd literally just gone to Legoland for Liliana's birthday. And I remember at that point, with her saying those words to me, feeling so panicked and scared and thinking again, there is no way this baby's going to survive. And I remember just going into complete meltdown at that point and saying to my partner, okay, we just need to go, get Liliana ready. We've got, I remember phoning my mum and saying, oh my God, meet us at the hospital. At that point, I went to the toilet before we were about to leave because I had the overwhelming urge to go to the toilet. And when I pulled my knickers down, I just saw a huge amount of blood and blood clots, like bright red blood. If there's blood like this must be like placental abruption, or the baby must have died and my body's getting rid of whatever's going on. So I really had no hope. So I don't even remember how we got in the car. I remember trying to get into the car and half being emotionally in a panic and just crying and in shock and thinking what's going to happen, but also the pain then amped up and the contractions were coming quicker and quicker. I think Ruben, my partner, and he's probably mentioned this in his own NICU video, that he still felt a little bit in denial about the situation and had kind of concluded that we had gone through so many scares throughout my pregnancy that this was another scare. We got there, I would say around sort of 11:30, quarter to midnight. My mum was there and I remember calling her before we arrived and saying, please get me a wheelchair, because I knew at that point I could feel intense pressure that I would not be able to stand up. So I knew that I would not be able to walk from the car park to the labour room. I would not be able to do that. So it literally felt like, I think having had an experience with my daughter where I had to be induced, so it was very different, it was all planned, and I knew that I was going to hospital to be induced, so I didn't go to hospital in active labour. So In comparison, I'm turning up to hospital, I'm literally screaming and it's echoing and reverberating through the whole building. And at that point we're getting in the lift, which you're not supposed to do when you're in labour, but I knew I would not be able to get up the stairs, even though it was one set of stairs really. So we're getting in the lift, and I remember being on the level where we needed to go to labour and delivery, being pushed through the doors and literally seeing about 3 or 4 midwives just running. And I remember hearing my partner speaking to the receptionist and saying, you know, blah, blah, our details. And she just said, go, go, go. And I remember them all saying, get her in the room, and going in the room. And I've never seen so many people in a room in the labour ward. I've been in the labour ward, obviously with my daughter. I could not believe the amount of people that were in the room. So I think there were approximately maybe 4 or 5 midwives, maybe more than that were in the room. There were like 2 consultants, or a consultant and a doctor from maternity, so gynecologists. And then I remember seeing the resuscitator, and seeing round the resuscitator ready to go, there was a consultant, neonatal doctor, a registrar, and another doctor, and 3 NICU nurses being round the resuscitator, ready for what was to come. And I remember being very panicked and crying, and saying to the midwife who was holding my hand, I said to her, is my baby dead? Is my baby going to die? And she was being amazingly reassuring. I could not fault her. I wish I could say what her name was, and I can't remember what her name was, but she was amazing. And I remember her putting the monitor belt around my bump, saying to me, look, let's just see what we can hear, and hearing his heartbeat straight away. And I remember her saying to me, he sounds absolutely fine, he sounds very happy in there. And then, you know, them pulling off, I remember everyone pulling off my knickers, my trousers, and just voices all around me. I remember Ruben, my partner, asking questions, and then saying to the midwife, is he going to survive? Is he going to be disabled? It's crazy how in this situation where it's just like major adrenaline, and you're, first of all, you're scared, you're frightened, you're stressed, you're in physical pain, but you're also thinking about, okay, this is just about a 26-week gestation pregnancy. What is going to happen? I knew nothing. I walked past the neonatal unit so many times, you know, being pregnant with Liliana before and going for scans and checkups at the hospital on that level. You walk past the neonatal unit all the time. When I gave birth to Liliana, walking past it, I remember walking past it in a professional capacity with my job, like going to work at that hospital, and kind of looking at it, but never really thinking about it, never thinking about what it's like to be a mum of a premature baby. At that point, I'm asking all these questions, like what's going to happen to my baby? And I remember the midwife holding my hand and saying to me, we don't know, but all I can say to you is you are in the best place possible. You live here, and we have the best neonatal unit in this region next door. I didn't have much of a chance to breathe in between contractions. So I remember thinking, this is so much worse than my labour and delivery with my daughter. And I was induced with her. But I felt like I literally did not have a chance to breathe in between contractions. I did not realise that you could give birth to a premature baby naturally. I thought all premature babies, if you're in premature labour, they would stop you from giving birth. and like naturally vaginally, and you would be taken for an emergency C-section. I remember seeing something about women being given a drug to stop them from continuing the labour. So I was like, why, you know, I was thinking in my mind, why are they not giving that to me? It seems like they're just letting me go through the labour. A doctor comes over to me and says, okay, this is what we need to do. We've checked you, you're 4 centimetres dilated. This means we may be able to stop what's going to happen. There was a discussion about whether or not the labour would continue, and it was explained to me that 4 centimetres, sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean that the labour will progress to a full delivery, that you know, women can take weeks to actually deliver, and that there's things that can be done in the interim. It was then explained to me that it was very important at this point for the professionals to get steroids into me for the baby, for his lungs, and that he needed 2 lots of steroids if possible to give him the best chance, and also magnesium for his brain. The pain that I was in was pretty awful, and later on when I sat down for my meeting, my reflections meeting with a midwife, I found out why. So yeah, so I was given some pain relief, which was just gas and air, and I remember at one point being so frustrated and throwing the gas and air on the floor. It probably got to around about maybe 1:30 in the morning. At that point, most of the neonatal unit staff had left. At this point, around about 1:30, I remember saying to my partner, I feel like I'm going to die. Like, I felt like the pain was so intense. I didn't have, you know, I had maybe a few seconds to breathe in between the previous contractions, but it was getting worse. And I think at this point, the midwife re-examined me and agreed that she needed to check me again, to check my cervix. At this point, the pain was progressively getting worse, and they gave me some Oromorph, and then there was talk of giving me something stronger. And then some time passes. I remember the consultant coming in, the midwife and the consultant checking me and seeing that I was fully dilated. Then it was kind of everybody piling back in the room, everybody from the neonatal unit coming back in, and I remember just being in such intense pain and feeling scared, and my partner asking me if I wanted to have a C-section. At this point, obviously we didn't realise how far everything had progressed, so I really wasn't thinking about things in that sense. But obviously, being fully dilated, it was now sort of like the panic moments of the labour, and my body wanted to push. At this point though, I said to the midwife, I really need to push, and she said, no, you cannot push. You have to fight the urge to push, because I didn't realise you couldn't push a premature baby out. That was one of the most difficult experiences I've ever had, you know, feeling such intense pain, not having the space in between contractions to breathe. And I remember getting to the point where I said, I can't stop myself, please let me push. And the midwife said, do what you need to do. At this moment, I remember feeling the pressure getting more and more intense, and then giving an almighty push, so giving into my body's urges, and I felt a pop and water spraying everywhere and everybody sort of gasping. So I knew that Caleb had been born. And what's so awful about that moment is obviously the relief of not feeling that pain of contractions anymore, you know, the shock and the after pain comes later, but not being able to hear a cry, not being able to see your baby, not being able to hold your baby, but your baby being taken away straight away by doctors. And I knew that they were working on him. And I remember looking over at my partner and saying, can you hear him cry? Or can you hear any noises? And he said no. And I remember remember just hearing a really slight noise, and I said, did you hear a tiny noise? And he said, yeah, and I think that was it, that's all we heard. We didn't hear any crying. So at this point, obviously all the same things happen as it does with a full-term birth. I was delivering the placenta, which was then being taken away to be tested, and then I asked if I could see my baby briefly before he was whisked off to the NICU. I was allowed to see him. He'd been ventilated at that point, and I was able to put my finger into his tiny little hand and to look at his face, and luckily my partner took a picture. I'm so grateful that we were able to have that picture, because I think I just stared at that picture on and off for the many hours wait afterwards to know if he was okay. So he was taken away to the NICU, which absolutely killed me. I mean, it is the most indescribable pain. Like, I would take the physical pain of the actual act of the birth any time over the you know, the emotional and psychological pain that I felt not being able to know if my baby's okay, but also to hold my baby and have that time that is so precious after giving birth and having carried your baby through the pregnancy. So that was incredibly hard. We were briefed by the registrar from the neonatal unit. He went through all of the statistics with my partner. I really don't think I took any of it in at that point. I was so distraught and shocked and concerned, and also physically completely spent from that experience. And he went through the survival statistics, which my partner talks about in his dad's NICU experience video more in depth, but I really couldn't take a lot of it in. I thought, you know, we really are at the extreme end. I understood that, because I understood in terms of viability, 24 weeks was like the cut-off, so we were only kind of 2 weeks past that. But it was explained to us that every week, every day and every hour counts when you have a premature baby, and makes a difference in terms of how they will endure the journey of prematurity. So I think, you know, after that I had some issues in terms of blood loss. I had to face that. I was being prepped for potential surgery because of the blood loss, and whilst this is all sort of going on, I think because I'd lost about twice the volume I was supposed to, I'm frantically searching on Google survival rates and impact of premature labour on a baby. And, you know, I was really frantically searching and looking at like then and now stories, like to understand, okay, what is the worst case scenario? What are the best case scenarios? You know, what kind of issues do 26 weekers face throughout their childhood and later on in life? Like, what do I have to prepare myself for? So I was just frantically searching. I think my main concern at that stage was if he would even survive. I was so worried that they were going to tell me that he passed away, and then I thought about the fact that they might come and tell me that he survived, but he will have X, Y and Z issue, health issue. So the consultant registrar from the NICU came in, spoke to my partner, who was obviously mobile and able to get up and out and go round to the NICU, and showed us both a photo of Caleb in his incubator, intubated and on a ventilator and everything, and said to my partner, do you want to come in and see him? At that point I couldn't get up and out because I needed to be seen by the midwife and given the all clear. That was very frustrating, but I was happy that Caleb's dad was able to go round and see him, take some videos, hold his hand and come back round and show me. So he went round to the neonatal unit. I stayed at the labour ward, and at that point I asked the midwife, what do I need to do to be able to get up and to go to the neonatal unit? I was so focused on that. I didn't want anything to hold me back. And she said to me, you need to have a drink, something to eat, and you need to get up and show me that you can walk. At that point, my partner came back. He decided to go home, get some rest, get showered, and swap over with my mum. My mum was incredibly distraught about the whole situation. So she came to the labour ward and helped me to get up and obviously walk and get changed, ready to go and see Caleb. I was wheeled round, and it just felt like the longest journey, which is, you know, literally 5 minutes down the corridor, but it literally felt like the longest journey. Like my heart was just broken. So as I enter the intensive care unit where Caleb was in his incubator, it was one of the most really quite daunting and overwhelming feelings. Being in an intensive care unit for babies for the first time, all of the sights and smells and noises and the emotional feeling in the room. I mean, you can feel the concern, the emotion, the despair, and the seriousness of it all as you walk into the room. But I remember walking in, it was Caleb in the incubator, right by the door as you come in, and there was one more baby in the room. It split into two sides, and we were on one side, and there were more babies and parents on the other side. And I remember the parents of the other baby being in the corner and really not caring about anything at that stage. I remember having a very small shirt on and having a catheter inserted, but really not caring about anything and just thinking, I need to see my baby. I remember spotting his legs moving, I think, in the incubator, and having this overwhelming feeling of sadness that my baby had been on his own for those first few hours after being born, which is a strange feeling because I understand that he wasn't on his own. He had doctors and nurses working on him, and he wouldn't have known any different. And it really, really hit me what was happening, that I wasn't pregnant anymore and my baby was there. He was so tiny in this incubator, and he just looked lost in a sea of blankets. And I remember reading all his details on the sticker on his incubator, and I couldn't believe that he was so tiny, that he weighed 864 grams, so not even a kilogram. And I think it really hit home at that point, like, how is he going to survive? I just thought, how is a baby this small going to even make it through? Like, and how long will it take him to even grow? At this stage, the nurse came over who was looking after him, but she explained to me what each tube was. So she explained to me that he was on a ventilator, that, you know, he had a tube going into his throat, and that he had different lines in his body, also on antibiotics, because I didn't know at that point, but he was being treated for sepsis. So it wasn't really that clear to me at that point. But something I forgot to mention when I spoke about my labour and my delivery earlier was the fact that when Caleb was born and he came out in his waters and the waters popped, was the commentary from everybody around me that he came out, it popped, and the waters smelt. So I remember that being said when the sac sort of exploded, that the midwives were sort of talking to each other saying, the waters smell, the waters smell. And that indicated, I mean, I'm not a professional in that field, but I understood what that meant, that there was some sort of infection. So therefore I was given antibiotics, and Caleb was given antibiotics, and he was being treated for sepsis. So at this point I'm also focused on the end in sight, because I'm aware that I've given birth to my baby 14 weeks earlier than he should have been here. So I know that I've got a long road ahead in terms of being at the NICU, my baby being at the NICU, and that it won't be a case of we're here a couple of weeks and going home. So I asked her how, what is the sort of shortest amount of time that someone spends in the NICU around the same sort of gestation as Caleb. And at that point she said to me, normally we'd say discharge would be due date, but we have had babies who were discharged at 35 weeks gestation, so what would have been 35 weeks in pregnancy. But they are normally babies that have no other issues and have a relatively straightforward journey in the NICU. And that really stayed with me. So that 35-week goal almost set off in my head that, okay, that's the earliest they've ever had someone discharged from NICU. That's what I'm going to focus on, and that is going to be my target. So whatever happens from here on out, I'm so focused on what do I need to do, what can I do to make that happen. So I think that's only natural as a mum, that you are so focused on your child and what they need from that very moment. And it's not a case of trying to get him out, because obviously if he needed to be in intensive care, he did. But it's obviously nicer for a baby to go through that journey and come out of that environment, because hospital, although it's great when you're in dire need of it, is not the best environment for a baby to be in, because infections can be caught, etc., and that can hamper development, especially with a vulnerable child. So I was so very focused on what would be required to get him to that stage. That was always my goal, but equally I needed to be focused on the here and now. What do I need to do minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day? So I knew that this was going to be a long journey, and I literally sat there for hours crying on and off, just looking at him, looking at the machines. And that was the start of, I think, a lot of parents who've experienced NICU or paediatrics, even pediatric intensive care. That was the start of my obsession with reading his SATs, so his oxygen saturation and his heart, and being obsessed with that, because that's all you really have apart from staring at your baby and various updates from the doctors and nurses looking after your baby. All you have is staring at this monitor all the time and thinking, okay, are they going to be okay? So the very first start of the journey, so the very first day, I'm looking at this monitor trying to figure it out. I don't understand what is the expected oxygen saturation level for a baby. I don't understand at that point what is a good heart rate for a baby. But I remember hearing alarms, just alarms, and if you've been through NICU, you will know what I mean by those alarms constantly going off. And his would turn red, flash red, on and off. And I remember at that point thinking, I don't know what that means, is that bad? And I'd panic, and I'd be calling the nurse over and saying, his machine's going off, it's glowing red, and she'd be like, it's okay, and she'd adjust something or do something, and then it would be fine, and then it would go off again, maybe later on and off. But you quickly become an expert in reading the SATs monitor, knowing the heart rate, understanding what those alarms mean. You quickly become an expert, let me tell you that, and you fixate. Thank you for watching part 1. Please like and subscribe, and I'll be posting part 2, Caleb's NICU journey, very shortly.